Hey gardening friends, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, thanks for stopping by. So these days I'm super focused on planning for the upcoming growing season. And today's video I'm going to be sharing all the different vegetables that I'm going to be starting indoors for spring planting. Now if you're new here, I garden in zone 6. And my last frost date is May 1st. So a lot of the vegetables that I'm going to show you are cool season vegetables or vegetables that prefer to be planted during the cooler months. Some of them are also vegetables that can be planted during the summer months, but I'm going to plant them out when it's a little bit cooler because I find that I get better production. So I'm going to start with vegetable seeds that I'm going to be planting the furthest out from my last frost date, and then we'll work our way towards those that I'm going to be direct sowing. Now, before I jump into all vegetables that I'm going to be planting out in the spring, I wanted to quickly show you something I picked up from the dollar store. So I picked up this little planner. It's a 2-year planner, and I'm just planning to utilize this to help me keep track of all the different things that I need to be doing from a gardening perspective, such as when I need to start certain seeds. So just one of the many tools that I thought I could add to my tool belt to help me stay organized and on track. I like it because it's really small, it's compact and I can fit it inside of my handbag or carry it in my pocket. But I've already started to fill out, with some key dates, such as when I need to start certain seeds, all the way up through my first fall frost. So just wanted to share that with you. There's some cool things you can pick up from the dollar store that can help you stay organized and stay on track with all of your garden planning. All right, so now let's jump back into vegetable seeds that we're going to be starting indoors for spring planting. All right, so this first set of seeds are seeds that I'm going to be starting at 15 weeks before my last frost date. And these are onion seeds. And I have 3 different types of onions that I'm going to be growing this year. One is a hybrid onion candy or hybrid candy onion. The other, and this one is a day neutral or intermediate onion. And then I have a Walla Walla onion and an, and an onion called hybrid onion Sierra Blanca. Long name. This one is day neutral as well. The Walla Walla onion is a long day variety. So because I garden in zone 6, based on so because I garden in zone 6, most of the research that I've done tells me that it's best for me to plant either a long day variety or an intermediate or day neutral variety. And that is because I live in an area where we see longer periods of daylight during the spring and summer months. Now, historically, I've not had a lot of luck getting my onions to form large bulbs. So I'm thinking that this is the year that I'm going to get some large onions. At least that's what I'm hoping for. But one of the things that I'm doing differently this year is I'm starting my onions a little bit earlier than I normally would. In prior years, I've started my onions at around 12 weeks before last frost date, and I think that that has contributed to me getting smaller bulb onions. This year, I'm going to be starting them a few weeks earlier at 15 weeks before my last frost date. So I'm hoping that that makes a really big difference this year and I get lots of onions with large bulbs. Now, my family and I don't eat a ton of onions throughout the year, but it would be nice to get a very good harvest of onions this season, such that we wouldn't have to necessarily go to the grocery store and purchase very many, if any at all. So my plan this year is to grow enough onions to last us for at least 9 months. So those are the onions that I'm growing this year. Next up on the list are the vegetable seeds that I'm going to be starting at 8 weeks before my last frost date. And just an FYI, I have previously shared all the different varieties of tomatoes and peppers that I'm going to be growing this season, and I'll link that up in the cards above in case you want to check it out. I'll also add links in the description box as well. All right, so at 8 weeks before my last frost date, I'm going to be starting broccoli, Watham 29. And this is just a traditional, broccoli. This says that it produces 4 to 6 inch blue-green heads. And this particular variety matures in 75 days. Broccoli doesn't really love really hot weather. So my plan is to plant this out in the springtime. That way I can harvest it in the early summer. And then I'll probably do another planting in the late summer for a fall harvest. The next one is Brussels sprout. This is a Brussels sprout that I picked up from, I think, a hardware store or something like that years ago. And I think it's by Fairy Morse. Yeah, Fairy Morse. So last year I grew Brussels sprouts for a fall harvest, but I started them too late in the season, so I really didn't get to harvest much, if anything at all. So this year my plan is to plant these out in the springtime so that I can hopefully harvest them in the midsummer, as Brussels sprouts take a long time to grow. This one has a days to maturity of 90 to 100 days. So they are very slow growing. But one plant will give you about 50 to 100 Brussels sprouts. So you can get quite a bit off of one plant. So yeah, that is my hope, is to be able to plant this out in the springtime so that I can hopefully harvest Brussels sprouts in the midsummer, and then I'll do another planting in the late summer for a fall harvest. The next one is cauliflower, and this is another one that I'm planning to put out in the springtime so that I can get a early summer harvest. And then I'll do another planting in the late summer for fall harvest. Now, for a lot of the vegetables that I just showed you, like the onions, the broccoli, the Brussels sprouts, the cauliflower, my plan is to grow enough so that it can sustain me and my family for at least 6 to 9 months. So with the onions, hopefully I can grow enough so that I can store them in a cool, dry place for several months, and then we can just use those throughout the year. Same thing with the broccoli, the Brussels sprouts, the cauliflower. My plan is to freeze whatever we don't use. That way we can use it throughout the year for either fresh eating or for cooking. And then at 6 weeks before my last frost date, there's quite a bit that I'm going to be starting in terms of vegetables. So we'll start with the cucumbers. So I have 2 different types of cucumbers that I'm going to be starting. And one is a national pickling cucumber. And pick this one up from Park Seed. The other one is called Cucumber Bait Alpha. And this Bait Alpha, I believe, is a little bit longer of a cucumber than the national pickling. I prefer to use the national pickling cucumbers for making pickles. And I like to harvest them throughout, the summer and make fresh pickles for me and my family to enjoy during the summer. I also like the Bait Alpha for that as well, but I prefer to use the Bait Alpha for making like cucumber salads or throwing it in a lettuce salad. I also use it to make juices as well, so I'll use it as one of my key ingredients in my fresh juices that I like to make. So those are the 2 cucumber varieties that I'm going to be growing this year. And then I have a couple different lettuces that I'm going to be starting as well. The first variety is a red salad bowl lettuce, and this is from a company called Fairy Morse. I usually like to add different types of lettuces to my salad, so I think it kind of helps balance the flavor out a bit by adding the red salad bowl, because it does have a slightly, bitter or nutty flavor to it. The other lettuce I'm going to be growing is called a butter crunch lettuce. This one is sort of a cross between a loose leaf lettuce and a headed lettuce. It forms loose heads of lettuce with large ruffled leaves. And I like this for making salads as well. Then I have Marvel of Four Seasons, which is sort of a red cranberry colored lettuce. And this one is a bit sweet. It's very tender and almost paper thin. The other one is called Little Jim. And this one is a headed lettuce, so it forms sort of small, petite size heads of lettuce. This one to me is similar to the butter crunch, and that is sweet, but this is more velvety in texture. The butter crunch lettuce is more of a soft, buttery, um, you know, type of lettuce. So those are the lettuces that I'm going to be growing this season. I'm going to be planting my lettuce out in April because I want to ensure that I have sufficient time to harvest as much as I can before we get really hot weather here in my area, because once we start to get really hot weather, it's probably going to start to bolt and go to seed. So my hopes is that if I started at 6 weeks before last frost date, it'll be mature enough where then I can plant it out doors and be able to harvest it for a couple months before the weather starts to heat up. And I'm going to be planting all of my lettuce in my green stalk planter. I prefer to plant it there because it's easy for me to access throughout the spring and early summer months, because my green stalk planter is located literally like right outside of my patio door. Last year I also planted a couple in small containers, so I may do that as well. As far as my cucumbers, I'm going to be planting those mostly in containers that have trellises in them so that they can climb and, do what they like to do. All right, so this next set of cool weather vegetables are ones that I'm also going to be starting at 6 weeks before my last frost date. And these are mostly leafy green vegetables. So the first one is kale. So this is called narrow kale. And this one has a days to maturity of 21 to 62 days. I prefer to plant this out in the springtime as well, so I don't get as much pest pressure. Usually the cabbage worms start to move in during the early summer months. So if I can get this planted in the springtime, I can at least harvest it for about a month or so before they start to get attacked by the cabbage moth. And then I have some Swiss chard, two different types of Swiss chard. One is called giant Ford hook Swiss chard, and this is by Burpee. And this has a days to maturity of 60 days. Then I have a rainbow Swiss chard, which is from a seed company called Livingston. And this has a similar days to maturity. Now I'm going to be planting my Swiss chard out in the spring, but Swiss chard can also tolerate heat. So my plan is to succession plant this throughout the season. So I'm going to do my first planting in the spring, and then I'll probably do another planting in the early summer. I will continue to harvest off of the Swiss chard as long as it keeps producing. Once I see that it's not producing as much, that's when I'm going to start another succession, and I will continue to do that throughout the fall. Swiss chard is good because it can tolerate heat, and it can also tolerate, frost. So it's one that I like to grow basically from spring through my first fall frost. It's a very productive vegetable as well. I love using Swiss chard to make salads. I also like to use it to add to my ramen noodle bowls as well. So we'll be growing lots of Swiss chard again this year. And then the other ones I have are some pak choi. So this is similar to a bok choy, I think, but this one gets a little bit bigger. And this has a days to maturity of 45 days. I love using bok choy, pak choy, all the choys to make ramen bowls. So looking forward to growing plenty of this. I usually plant this out in the spring. It doesn't tolerate heat very well, so I prefer to grow it in the springtime. So I intend to plant this out in April. I'll harvest as much as I can, and then I'll do another planting in the late summer for a fall harvest as well. Now, one thing to note about bok choy and pak choy and all the other choys, they do freeze well. So what I typically do is whatever we don't use during the growing season, I'll chop it up and I'll throw it in the freezer. and then I just use it, as needed, for cooking throughout the year. So that is pak choi. The other leafy greens that I have here are cabbage. So this is an early Jersey Wakefield cabbage. And I've been growing this for a couple of years now. Love it. It's a smaller or more compact cabbage, but it has a days to maturity of, well, I don't have it written down here on the packet, so I will have to put that up on the screen. But grew a lot of this last year. Looking forward to growing more. This is another one that I will freeze whatever we don't use, and then I will pull it out of the freezer and use it as needed for cooking. Love cabbage. And then I have some collard greens. So grew lots of collards last year as well. I'm going to be planting these out in the spring. And then my intention is to succession sow these throughout the season. Now, collard greens is another one where you can freeze whatever you don't use. So I'm hoping to harvest as much as I can so that I can throw them in the freezer and then we can use them as needed, throughout the year. And then the last leafy green that I have is spinach. And this is called hybrid spinach lakeside. I have not historically had a very good experience growing lettuce. Um, some years I get a decent harvest, and other years it's just, very slow to grow, and then I barely get anything. So this year I have a feeling I'm going to get a lot better harvest of spinach. I love to use spinach for making smoothies, as well as for adding to salads, as well as for fresh eating. My plan is to plant this out in the springtime, so in April, and then I'll harvest as much as I can before it gets really hot, and then I'll plant more in the late summer for a fall harvest. So that's the plan for spinach, as well as the other leafy greens that I just showed you. And then at 4 weeks before my last frost date, there's only one vegetable that I'm going to be starting, and that is zucchini. So I love eating zucchini throughout the summer and fall. Unfortunately, I don't have the best of luck growing it during the summer months. So my plan is to start it at 4 weeks before my last frost date so that it has time to get established, and then I can plant it out in the late spring, early summer, and hopefully harvest as much as I can before they get taken over by the squash bugs and the squash vine borer. And then I'll do another planting in the late summer for a fall harvest. So that's the plan for the zucchini. And then I have a few vegetables that I'm going to direct sow around 2 to 4 weeks before my last spring frost date. And it's mostly root vegetables, like carrots. So I have a lot of different types of carrots that I'm going to be planting this year. I also have one other vegetable that I'm going to be direct sowing at 2 to 4 weeks before my last frost date that's not a carrot, and that's a radish. So I have a radish cherry bell, and I have tried starting my radish seeds indoors and then transplanting them outdoors in the spring, but I find that they do a lot better when I direct sow them. So that's what I'm going to be doing this year. And I like to use radish for fresh eating. I'll chop it up, I'll throw it in a salad. I also like to cook with it. During the summer months, I like to throw it in my pot of ramen. Adds a nice touch of flavor to the ramen bowl. So if you've not tried it that way, would definitely recommend it. The other root vegetables that I'm going to be direct sowing 2 to 4 weeks before my last frost date, as I mentioned, are carrots. And I have five, no, let's see, I have three different varieties of carrots. For some of them, I have the same variety of carrot, just from different seed companies. So the first carrot is called a scarlet Nantes carrot. And this one matures in 60 to 75 days. I find with this particular carrot, you can plant it out in the worst soil and it'll do great. So if you are one that doesn't have the greatest of soil, I would definitely recommend growing this type of carrot. It does really well in heavy soil, and even in soil that doesn't have the greatest drainage, it seems to do really well. So that's one carrot. The other carrot I'm going to be growing this year is called little finger carrot. And I'm going to be using this seed from two different companies. So this one is from Botanical Interest, and the other little finger is from a company called Park Seed. I like the little finger carrot for snacking. It's a nice snacking carrot. It's a nice baby carrot that you can also throw in your soups as well. It says it can grow up to 3 inches long and it matures in 57 days. So love these. They're nice and tender as well. And then the other variety of carrot I'm going to be growing is called a Shin Carota carrot. And I have one that's from Botanical Interest. And then the other one is from Baker Creek. And this is probably like your more traditional carrot. This one can grow up to 5 inches long. The one thing I like about this carrot seed is that it is very heat resistant. So if you live like me in a climate where it gets really hot during the summer months, this is definitely maybe a variety to consider. Now I'm going to be planting all these carrots out before my last spring frost date, about 2 to 4 weeks before then. So my plan for these carrots is to plant them all in my raised garden beds. When I do my spring planting, I'm going to basically just plant them throughout the garden beds. But I'm also going to succession plant these carrots. I'm going to do another planting for fall. So another planting in like the late summer months. And for the late summer planting, I'm going to actually interplant them in my pepper bed as well as some of my other beds that I use to grow vegetables. That way, the taller vegetable plants can kind of provide shade for the carrots. Last year, I utilized the same technique during the late summer and it worked out really well. So, hence why I'm going to be trying it out again for this year. Now, if you don't have raised garden beds or even in-ground space to grow carrots, you can definitely also grow them in containers. I've grown the little finger carrots in planters and containers, and they have done really well there. So there's lots of other ways that you can grow carrots if you don't have raised beds or in-ground growing space. And then last but not least are beans and peas. So I'm going to be direct sowing all of my beans and peas 1 to 2 weeks after my last frost date. And that is because these beans and peas that I'm going to be sowing are frost sensitive. They don't tolerate frost very well. So I want to make sure that we're past our last chance of frost when I plant these out. But I am going to be direct sowing these. So let's start with the beans. So the first variety of bean I'm going to be direct sowing is called a gold rush bean. And this is a bush bean. And this one matures in 54 days. It's a golden yellow bean, very tender. I love to eat these fresh off of the plant throughout the season as they're coming in. And towards the end of the season, I will freeze whatever we don't use so that we can utilize it throughout the year for cooking. This is one of my favorite beans to grow. Now, for the most part, I'm the only person in the house that eats beans. Um, One of my sons will eat them occasionally. So I like to ensure that I have enough to last me throughout the year so I don't have to purchase any beans from the store. I still have beans in the freezer from 2025 that I'm still working through. So hopefully I can get a good harvest again to last us all year long. So the next bean I'm going to be growing is called a Blue Lake bean, and this is a pole bean. So this particular variety loves to climb. So it wants to climb up a trellis, a pole, a fence, or something similar, as opposed to the other variety that I just showed you is more of a bush variety. And those will stay sort of small and compact, so low to the ground. You don't have to worry about trellising them. And the bush varieties are great for containers. So if you're someone who prefers to garden in containers or you have limited garden space, you can definitely grow bush beans in containers and they will thrive throughout the season. The next bean I'm going to be growing is called a jade bean, and this is another bush bean, so more of a compact bushy plant. This one matures in 55 days. And I don't know if I said it, but this blue lake bean matures in 66 days. Sometimes I find toward the end of the season, my beans tend to get like a rust, or the leaves tend to get like a rust effect to them. And the only bean that I have that is resistant to that is this jade bean. The other ones are resistant to, common, viruses, but they're not resistant um, to that rust, that sort of rusty effect that you sometimes see on your bean leaves. So if that's something that's important to you, you may want to check these 3 varieties out. And then I'm also going to be growing some sugar snap peas. So this is the only pea that I'm planning to grow in 2026. Sugar snap peas. I purchased this from Park Seed. As big as this package is, I'll have enough seeds to last me for the next 10 years. I usually only have to plant, like a couple at a time. So my plan is to direct sow these sugar snap peas 1 to 2 weeks after my last frost. Then I typically succession sow them up until we start to get really hot temperatures. And then I will discontinue direct sowing, and then I'll pick it back up again in the late summer, early fall for fall harvesting. So those are all of the vegetables that I'm going to be planting out in the springtime. In many cases, I'm going to be succession sowing a lot of these vegetables so that I can harvest them throughout the season. So I will be bringing you along with me as I start these seeds over the coming months. So be sure to come back and check out those videos. Hopefully this gives you some ideas of other types of vegetables that you can grow in your growing space, especially if it's something that you've not grown before. Let me know if you're planning on growing any of these vegetables in your garden this year. I hope to see you back here soon, friends. Until next time, take care.